The story begins with a guy waking up in the middle of a snowy forest, wondering where he is. Soon enough, an insect-like monster called a gigiri starts to chase him and almost chops his head off until he falls through the ice. He thinks he's safe, but the monster finds him after a little game of hide and seek. Luckily, the monster is eaten by a gooey creature called the Curse, and a girl named Kuon comes to save him. Kuon realizes that he has amnesia. On their way, he keeps taking breaks from walking, but Kuon tells them there'll be monster food if they keep dragging their feet. He decides to follow Kuon to her village, which is in the capital of the Yamato country. On their way, he wonders if Kuon's tail is real and yanks it, which makes her slap him with it. The next morning, he gets to Kuon's village and finds others like her. They both get a room in an inn. Kuon offers to be his guardian and decides to name him Haku, despite his protest. When it's time for dinner, Haku notices Kuon has quite the appetite as she gobbles up all the food. He goes to have a bath and Kuon spies on him, and what she sees shocks her. Before he sleeps, Kuon applies some medicine to his wounds and he wakes up completely healed. The next morning, they both go to work and Haku seems to suck at everything. Haku finally gets a job at a broken water wheel and fixes the water wheel to avoid work. He decides to hide this so he doesn't get more work, but the boss of the village, Yukon, finds out. The next day, Haku gets a bonus payment for fixing the water wheel. Soon, Yukon sees Kuon giving medicine to a man attacked by the gigiri and asks her to come along with him to hunt some. Halfway through the journey, Haku almost dies of exhaustion, and the men allow him to ride on the cart, where he meets a scholar named Mororo. On the site, Mororo does some magic on some small gigiris and the men attack the rest. A really large one comes to attack them, and they escape. Yukon sends his men back to the village, but Kuon decides to stay and help Yukon, and she forces Haku to join her. As they brainstorm, Haku remembers the curse that had helped him take out the large gigiri, and Kuon suggests that they go find it, to Haku's shock. Later, they lure the curse towards the monster, and it consumes it. The curse stares at them and leaves after it spots Haku. That night, they celebrate their victory. The next morning, Haku meets a large talking bird named Kopoko and is shocked. He later accepts that it must be absolutely normal since he had seen other weird stuff until Yukon lets him know he has actually been speaking to the woman on the bird named Rurutie, who is a princess of one division of Yamato. Yukon asks Kuon and Haku to help him take Rurutie to the capital. During their journey, Kopoko develops a liking for Haku. At night, Rurutie cooks for Haku, and he decides to impress her by fetching her some bath water. While Rurutie and Kuon have their bath, Kuon warns Haku not to peek. Soon after, Kuon realizes someone is watching them and chases the person, who escapes. She runs into Haku, who sees all her glory. The next morning, Haku notices that the number of people in their company has decreased. They run into Nosori, who had been spying on Kuon, who traps them with a gang called the Mozunu Gang. After the bandits leave with their goods, Haku wonders why Yukon let them get away without a fight, and Yukon tells them it's part of his plan. Meanwhile, Nosori breaks her alliance with Mozunu's gang and attacks them with some of Yukon's men who were hiding in the cargo. Soon, a royal general named Oshutoru comes to arrest the gang and thank the team. When they return, Yukon's sister Nekona shouts at him for getting her worry while he was away. Yukon tells the ladies about a hot bath, and Kuon drags Rurutie and Nekona to have a bath. Rurutie faints while fantasizing about Haku and Yukon having a bath together. The next morning, Nekona shows them around the city to get closer to Haku and learn why her brother likes him. That night, Nekona comes to ask Haku how he just trusts everyone easily, and he tells her to free herself and do it, but she still thinks he's a failure. Haku receives a letter of invitation from Yukon, and Rurutie faints again, thinking about Yukon and Haku alone. At Yukon's home, Yukon reveals that his true identity is Oshutoru, Yamato's general of the right, despite Nekona's protest. Later, Yukon offers Kuon and Haku a secret mission to protect the capital while he is away. Haku feels the jobs are more odd jobs than secret missions. Later, Haku diligently learns to read and write. On his way, Haku gets his food knocked out of his hands by a lady named Atui, who is being chased by a guy named Kuru. After they escape Kuru, Atui tells Haku that she ran away from home to find love, and he decides to ditch her, but agrees to show her around where she clings to him. While they walk, Atui tells Haku about a man named the Righteous Man, who was sent by the Emperor to do good to the people. They run into Kuru and the rest of their friends. Kuru turns out to be Nekona's brother and tells them that Oshutoru had also told him to find Atui, who is a runaway princess. That night, Haku confronts Oshutoru about being the righteous man who has been helping the people. Later, Kuru and Atui move in with them. While having a bath, Haku runs into an unclad woman named Karura, who offers him a drink. Later, Haku receives an invitation to a banquet from Karura, who turns out to be the owner of the inn. At the banquet, Koon hints that Karura is her mother but lies that she is her sister after Karura threatens her not to reveal that with some terrible eye contact. Karura seems to remember someone with the name Haku. Koon tells Haku that she was raised by several mothers in a land called Tusker and introduces Haku to Toka, one of her mothers. They soon start drinking and Haku sleeps off after getting drunk. One day, while Atsui and Rurutie are out, Rurutie spots a Boy Love magazine store and rushes in to look for her favorite issue by an author named Rao Rao Sensei. When they get out of the store, a little girl named Anju bumps into Rurutie and picks up her book. Anju likes the book because she says it encourages male friendship and she runs away with it. Soon after, one of the 8 pillar generals of Yamato Mumichika comes to deal with Anju for escaping from the palace. The day of the festival, the 8 pillar generals show up, and they all find out that Anju is the princess of Yamato. Meanwhile, a man named Dekapampo invites people to his ship for a party with some selfish intent, despite the protests of his assistant Boko Inante. At the party, everyone wears masks, and Ashutoru takes Haku and Atsui to the party to expose the corruption of Dekapampo, who is one of the pillar generals. Ashutoru goes underground and finds a nest of gigiris that Dekapampo had been keeping. Meanwhile, some gigiris invade the party and start to take people out. In his office, Boko Inante goes to apologize to Dekapampo for the occurrence, but he only asks him to save his treasure from the ship, and it seems he was aware of it all along. While fighting the bugs, Oshutoru orders Haku to go check Dekapampo's room for some evidence. On their escape boat, Boko Inante realizes he forgot one of the golds, and Dekapampo orders him to go get it back. Back on the ship, he finds the gold with Haku, whom he almost kills, until Nosori and Aoji come to help him after obtaining evidence against Dekapampo. When they get out, Oshutoru tells Haku he is living a double life as a general and as Yukon to be able to help people as a general and on the streets. Soon, Kwon tells Haku they need to leave the city to avoid her sisters, Kamyu and Aurora, who had come from Tusker to take her home, but they soon find her. Kwon complains about her sister's overprotectiveness because they follow her everywhere. Meanwhile, Kapoko gets along with Makaru, Kamyu's pet tiger. Later, Ashutoru comes to take Haku, who was summoned by the Emperor. In the palace, the Emperor commends Haku for looking after his daughter and gifts him with 2 women called the Kamunagi of Chains, named Yururu and Sarana. Nearby, Dekapampo is angry that the Emperor gave the Kamunagi of Chains to a lowlife like Haku, but the other generals remind him it'll be treason to question the Emperor's wise judgments. At home, Haku explains to the women that he was forced to keep Yururu and Sarana, but Yururu and Sarana both seem to be devoted to do anything Haku wants, even the lewdest of things. Rurutie can't stand all the attention the girls are giving Haku, and she tells them it's her job to cook for him and help him, but accidentally spills some tea on him. Later, Sarana and Rurura use their magic to dry up Haku's pants. Soon, the candy seller named Sekon comes to greet them. He tells them he knows Ashutoru's double identity and reveals his own true identity as Mikazuchi, one of the 8 pillar generals. In the Divine Court, the soldiers reveal to the Emperor that a force called Yuzurusha is about to invade Yamato, and the Emperor orders the generals to destroy them. Meanwhile, the leader of the Yuzurusha force named Gundora kills the messenger from Yamato and declares war. In the city, Haku is summoned to go see the Emperor face to face. The Emperor speaks kindly to him and asks him to call him by his name, Mito. Haku asks him why he has an interest in him, and the Emperor mentions that he can speak freely to him since Haku is alien to Yamato and the Emperor, unlike his subjects. In an inner room, the 8 pillar generals have a strategy meeting about the ongoing war, but everyone seems to ignore Dekapampo's yammering. General Washus later assigns everyone their roles, but assigns Dekapampo no roles since he's the weakest, which makes him storm out. Soon after, Dekapampo leaves Yamato to go face the Yuzurusha force without authorization. Washus sends Mikazuchi and Oshuturu to go handle Dekapampo. Before he leaves, General Virai reminds Oshuturu of a secret instruction from the Emperor. At home, Oshuturu prepares to leave for war, and Nekame and Kiru join him. Meanwhile, a Yuzurusha general, Zaguni, speaks to his daughter Entua, while he sends some supplies to the Yuzurusha forces. The next morning, Haku sleepily complains about working. Kun comes to inform him that Rurutie and Atsui have been ordered to join the war, and she proposes that they follow them, and Haku agrees in his sleep. Meanwhile, Dekapampo's soldiers defeat the first wave of Yuzurusha, and they decide to retreat. Against Morora's advice, Dekapampo orders his soldiers to pursue until they are trapped. Haku and the ladies head to the war. They soon get to the battlefield, and Haku tries to retreat, but the women tell him they must stay to fight. They notice that the Russia forces have put their Yamato hostages from a city called Nakuan at the warfront, and they all join the fight to save them, but Haku and Rurutie stay behind with Kopoko since they're the weakest. They notice some women kidnapped from the Nakuan land, and Rurutie tells Haku she wants to fight. Soon, they save the hostages and take out the soldiers. Atsui runs into the undefeated blade master Yakuto Warudo, who almost shaves her head off. Yakuto Warudo later helps them when he finds out that they had helped him free his kidnapped daughter, Shinana. Meanwhile, Dekapampo's forces are wiped out by the Russia forces, and Dekapampo decides to bail, until he is caught by Mikazuchi and Ashutoru. Haku and the rest decide to reunite with Mikazuchi and Ashutoru. Meanwhile, Ashutoru and Mikazuchi decide to fight an infantry force of about 6,000 soldiers alone. In a forest, the Russia fight and use the forest for coverage, but are surprised to find out that Reiko's archers, who have powerful eyes, can see into the forest. The Russia are wiped out by the arrows. Meanwhile, Munakika single-handedly takes out thousands of soldiers using her powers, while her men take out the rest. Virai, on the other hand, literally walks on water and destroys all his enemies. The generals of the Russia force keep sacrificing his soldiers as pawns. The Russia soldiers beg Virai and say the leaders of the Russia had kidnapped their families to make them fight, but Virai takes them out based on the emperor's instructions. Later, Saguni goes to report to Gundora that their soldiers have been taken out and begs him to retreat. Gundora commands they head west, but says it's not a retreat, but a change of direction. Oshutoru and Mikazuchi decide to pursue, but they run into Zaguni, who stands as the only line of defense while Gundora and the rest leave. Ashutoru fights Zaguni and kills him, while Intua watches nearby in horror. When they take the hostages to Maruruha, the wounded watchmen almost shoot Nosori full of arrows, mistaking them for enemies. Immediately, Virai transforms into a beast with a power the Emperor grants the masked members of the 8 pillars called the Akuruka, and destroys the enemies hiding in Maruruha, along with the kidnapped Yamato hostages. Agi mentions that he may have done that because he believes any Yamato hostage that surrendered to the Russia is a traitor, but Haku believes the Emperor wouldn't want this. Haku notices a family caught in the war and goes to help them, and Virai attempts to pummel him into the ground, but Yuruoru and Sarana create a barrier around Haku. Later, Reiko mentions that they have won the war. Meanwhile, Intua cries over her deceased father. Haku is shocked by how far they went and how lives were lost in war, and leaves to vomit when he remembers the families. The soldiers all return to Yamato, and Dekapampo enjoys the attention of the people, even though he did nothing. At home, Haku wakes up from nightmares of the carnage done by Virai. Later, the ladies come to plead with him to go out with them. While outside, Kun is worried that Haku isn't talking, and the ladies give him a gift to cheer him up. Later, Haku tells Kun he feels terrible for being unable to do anything during the war, but Nekona shouts at him for getting Kun worried with his attitude. The guys have a drink and try to cheer Haku up. Haku tells them he doesn't like war and doesn't like the fact that he was afraid. They tell him they keep fighting because of those they love. The ladies are happy Haku is feeling better and go to check on them, but find the men playing without clothes. Haku walks up to Kun and exposes his junk, but she knocks him out. Later, Ashutoru speaks to Haku about how war and bad things never go away, so all you can do is drink and laugh it off. The community girls come to summon Haku. At the palace, the Emperor commends Haku for the effort of his team. Haku asks why they had to go that far with the power of the masks, and the Emperor mentions that some terrible things have to be done to protect the people. Later, the Emperor tells him about their forefathers, the Onvi Taikayan, who had created the people and had disappeared. The Emperor points out that the people have bunny ears, except himself and Haku. The Emperor takes him to a lab, and Haku remembers working as a scientist and finds out Honoka is his sister. In a trance, Haku recalls a human engineering project called the Iceman Project to improve human life. In his memory, he goes to see his big brother and offers to be the subject for his project to improve human genetics and lifespan. Haku wakes up from his trance on the lab floor, and the Emperor tells him the Onvi Taikayan were called human beings. The Emperor tells him the original humans started to melt and became what is now known as the Curse. This caused a series of war and distrust that made the human race destroy themselves, but the created people remained. The Emperor mentions that he had lost all his family, and because he was unable to bear the loneliness, he created more decoys who now populated the Earth. But this was not enough, so he started research to reverse this curse. Haku later finds out that the Emperor is his elder brother, and Anju and Honoka are decoys created according to the likeness of his family. Meanwhile, Washes goes to speak to the leaders of Tusker to ask about the tomb of the last Oro. Later, the Emperor orders that Yamato invades Tusker. Ashutoru tells Haku that they're facing more opposition in their invasion of Tusker and asks Haku to help deliver supplies to their men in Tusker. Haku reminds Ashutoru of the consequence of asking him to participate in the invasion, but eventually accepts. When he gets home, Haku tells them what Ashutoru asked him to do, while Kuon stays in her room. He tells Kuon he understands he'll be fighting the people she dearly loves, but finds out she has left an hour earlier when he opens her door. They all decide to follow him to war, and Haku goes to look for Kuon to inform her. Later, Haku goes to meet Karura to drink and complain about all that is going on, and she advises him to always remain by Kuon's side. The next morning, Kuon arrives. On their way to Tusker, they stop at a port ruled by Atui's father. Suddenly, someone rushes towards them, and Atui goes into attack mode, but realizes it's her father, Soyankikuru. Soyankikuru asks Haku what his relationship with Atui is, and she mentions that he's a special man to her, which makes Soyankikuru drag him on the ship for a private discussion. Later, Kuon tells Haku that if they fight head-on, they will lose, so she had to follow him to end the war. When they get to land, Nosora rejoices after being seasick through the whole journey. Rutia faints again, staring at the muscly crew members. Kuon informs them of a secret road they can use to get the supplies to Munichika, but they don't notice Kamyu and Aruru watching them on a nearby mountain. During their journey, Kapoko spots Mukuru and chases after him excitedly. Aruru intentionally separates them from the rest of the soldiers to reduce the amount of food brought to the camp. Haku joins Munichika to attend a conference with Dekapampo and Reiko. Dekapampo tells them to launch a direct attack, but Munichika suggests that they retreat for now. Reiko grants Dekapampo his wish to attack, but reminds him not to mess up like the last time. Meanwhile, Washus informs the Emperor that the 3 armies sent to Tusker are insufficient, but assures him victory. The Emperor thanks him for the assurance but mentions that they need to work on a plan B just in case. In Tusker, Munichika and her men face a unit of soldiers called the Rakoshire who have found a way to stop Munichika from using her mass transformation. In a strategy meeting, Munichika mentions that Viray may be able to use his power since he was granted the ultimate power by the Emperor. Later, Haku suggests that they sneak in and destroy their food provision. They soon run out of ideas, but Haku gets one last idea but refuses to share it. Kuon tortures him till he reveals it. They later execute his idea of taking Kuon hostage and using her to get to the storeroom, while Munichika buys them time by fighting the Rakoshire. They get into the compound, but they run into Kuru, who is a formidable foe. Meanwhile, Munichika battles the Rakoshire commander, who is stronger than she is. Kuru turns out to be Kuon's past trainer. He speaks about how she has the power to tear the country in half. Haku later finds his way into the storeroom after Kuon distracts Kuru based on their past relationship. Kuru follows him to shave off his head, but Haku tosses a bomb there and escapes with Kuon. As they escape, Kuru steps out of the rubble unaffected. The community girls immediately teleport them to safety, but before they do, Kuru learns of Haku's name and is surprised. Back in camp, a message about the Emperor's death arrives. Meanwhile, Kuru and the soldiers from Tusker pursue them as they escape into Soyankikuru's ship. Munichika orders everyone on board and stays to activate the power of the mask. She successfully buys them time to leave, but is captured by Kuru. At the capital, everyone mourns the death of the Emperor. On the ship, everyone quietly thinks about what just happened. Kuon comes to ask Haku why he is the most affected by the death of the Emperor. Meanwhile, Ashutoru brings the princess some tea, but for some reason she collapses. Later, Dekapampo taunts Ashutoru, who has been imprisoned. During the 8 general meeting, they deliberate whether Ashutoru was framed or not and learn that the people and Ashutoru's soldiers have come to protest against Ashutoru's arrest. Viray goes to see Ashutoru and knocks out the soldier torturing him. Haku and the others return and hear the news about Ashutoru. Outside the palace, the soldiers announce to the people that the 8 pillar generals have decided to behead Ashutoru the next day. Dekapampo rejoices about taking Ashutoru's mask, but accidentally loses the mask. Meanwhile, Viray comes to tell Ashutoru that he has been set up by people who distrust his loyalty to their course. Viray tells him he'll fight for him, but it may be a better idea for him to confess to the crime and die to avoid an uproar in Yamato. Haku and the rest learn that Ashutoru has chosen to die, and Nekame says he must be giving up his life for Yamato. They decide to save him and take him to Enakamui, their homeland. They decide to save Ashutoru and the princess, but realize someone has erected a barrier that stops the Komunagi girls from teleporting them inside. Fortunately, Karura and Toka arrive with a plan to sneak into the palace through the sewers. Meanwhile, the generals realize Vurai has gotten a confession from Ashutoru in exchange for the life of the people, but Dekapampo plans to stop Vurai from taking over Yamato after Ashutoru is beheaded. Haku and the rest sneak into the palace and Kuon and Yakuto Arudo take the princess, who is still unwell and Hanoka allows them. Meanwhile, Haku, who has been training, fights the guards and goes to save Ashutoru. Ashutoru refuses to leave with them because he knows the power struggle between the 8 generals will never end and would like to stay so the common folks are not killed. Haku and Nekama decide to stay with Ashutoru and also get beheaded since he didn't want to leave. Eventually, Ashutoru leaves with them to save their lives. The soldiers ambush them, but Yakuto Arudo stays to fight them all off and leave the rest to escape. Meanwhile, the 8 generals decide to retrieve Ashutoru dead or alive. Dekapampo mobilizes his soldiers to go after them. Haku and the rest make their way through the city and avoid the soldiers while Kuon and Nosori carry the princess to safety. Reiko finds out their location and sends soldiers after the princess. Kuon and Nosori realize that the 8 generals have sent these archers to kill the princess for their own selfish pursuits, but when the archers shoot arrows at them, Kuon starts to glow and burns the soldiers and their suspended arrows in mid-air with some supernatural power. Eventually, Ashutoru and Haku run into soldiers and engage them. Haku eventually has an idea to escape through the sewers. Meanwhile, Rurutie is forced to arrest Kuon and Nosori, but Kapoko slaps her and tells her not to do what she doesn't believe in. When the soldiers show up, Kapoko fights the soldiers with some cool kung fu skills. They run into Atui, who pretends to arrest them but takes out the soldiers. Haku, Nekamana, and Ashutoru are soon ambushed by Vurai's soldiers. Meanwhile, Atui and the rest run into Soy and Kakuru and his men, but Soy and Kakuru turns a blind eye on the ladies hiding in the boat. On the boat, the ladies worry about the guys, but Kuon assures them that Haku will make it back like he always does. Meanwhile, Vurai and Ashutoru argue about leaving the fate of Yamato in the hands of the princess, but Vurai says he only, who wields the absolute power, can become the next emperor. Vurai and Ashutoru use their powers and start to fight, but Ashutoru starts to lose due to his wounds. Ashutoru and Vurai transform with the power of the mask. In the court, Mikazuchi tries to stop the fight, but Reiko tells him to let them kill one another, as this is the decision of the 8 pillar generals, and threatens him with the consequence of his disobedience. Meanwhile, Ashutoru keeps getting his butt handed to him during his fight. The Komunagi girls tell Haku of the power of Onryaku, which allows them seal the mask's powers, and Haku understands why the emperor gave them to him. Immediately, the Komunagi girls seal the power of the masks. Haku tries to go help Ashutoru, but he is caught by Vurai, who is later stabbed by Ashutoru. Ashutoru and Nekana arrive in Enakaimu without Haku and announce that Haku is dead. Later, everyone's mood goes down due to the news and Kuon decides to leave Enakaimu. Meanwhile, Nekana announces to Ashutoru that the remaining 8 pillar generals are going to try to attack the princess. Ashutoru takes off his mask, and it turns out that Haku had taken up his mask to carry on his identity after the original Ashutoru passed away. In a flashback, Ashutoru tells Haku that his days with him were joyful as he disintegrates, as is the fate of all those who bear the Akurichiruka mask. Ashutoru hands the mask to Haku as he fades away and tells his sister not to cry. Haku, Nekana, and the Komunagi girls return to Ashutoru's burial place. Haku wonders if he can fill Ashutoru's shoes. Later at night, as Kuon leaves, Haku wonders if it's better to tell her the truth, but decides there's no turning back. He announces to the people of Enakume that the country of Yamato is in danger and promises to earn victory with their help by going into the war he always dreaded so much. The end. Check our other videos and also subscribe for more recaps. Thanks for watching.